So I guess, is there anybody here currently that has like some issue or something that you feel like isn't being talked about right now that we could make sure and maybe direct towards them before they get there? Is there anything that we're sort of neglecting in terms of the aspects of the disabilities community? Because I want to make sure your needs are addressed, because we've got an election year coming up and we need to be organized, we need to be pressuring people, we need to know what the talking points are. You know, we got to stay on top of this. The disabilities community relies on us to sort of speak for them, and this election is so critical. It's like, that's why Nani keeps saying, Michelle Lujan Grisham, because it's just, I mean, it could be really devastating to this community if we don't stay on top of the politics. So is there anything that comes up for you folks when you're, yeah?
The biggest issue that I've been having lately has been in healthcare. And because my daughter's had such a major set of unfortunate things happen. But because she's fairly nonverbal, the first thing that was done was to give her depression medicine instead of trying to find really what the root problem was. And does anyone else have that same experience where the doctors are more, I mean, again, I feel like I have a good medical team, but I've noticed as a whole that a lot of the doctors are very standoffish about treating my daughter and trying to, they don't do as many physical exams when they're very PPR. I had one doctor that stood 10 feet away and said there's nothing you can do. But after he was 10 feet away, he never touched her, he never listened to her, he never actually came in and really did an exam on her to see if her hands were cold or whatever. And it was very frustrating. I've had other experiences that were very good. But does anyone else have that same experience? I mean, I know we've been talking about from more the political standpoint, but the medical end is.
Well, it's all of the, it's educating the people who decide the fate of this community, and that's either medical establishment, political establishment. It doesn't matter. If there's no, we need to stop compartmentalizing this. It's one specific issue, it's one specific community, and it's one sort of oversight agency, whether it's military or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's real simple stuff. I just want to hear her story now.
Well, my loved one, my sister-in-law, she has a disability, but I did notice it's really frustrating in the medical community. But I've experienced the same thing, because I would take her to her doctor's appointments. The doctor would, push pills on her. She's taking a ton of medications that I don't feel she needs to be on. Nobody's ever said, well, maybe we can get her some therapy services. Nothing was ever given to us, any resources.
It's hard to find a doctor who is willing to treat disability or special needs.
It's very difficult.
Is that some experience for you, or?
No, I was going to talk equally on medical issues, but it's also a political issue, which what's
I just want to make sure everybody can hear, because I think this is a really important conversation.
This isn't quite the same thing, but it does have to do with the medical field and also political with the upcoming election and where our taxpayer dollars are going. I work for a speech therapist, and one of my jobs is to get prior authorizations. So there are different agencies I have to go through, insurance companies, but there's also direct Medicaid. We have a third-party system in the state, which the client is Qualis, and we don't pay for that. And I'm just going to say names. Okay, so Qualis and Conduent is what a lot of people with disabilities have to deal with, either for the DD waiver or other medical issues. And here's an example that just happened to me yesterday. It was very frustrating because we are paying out of our taxpayer pockets to the state, who then hires these third-party companies. So, for example, Qualys will say you can no longer ask for a prior authorization for someone who's very, very much qualified, but prior authorizations have time limits and you have to reapply. So this is a child, and this child qualifies, but I have to do the prior authorization, so you can no longer fax it in unless it's really a medical emergency of life or death. Otherwise, you must go through their web portal, which is kind of new, and they don't even understand themselves. They give you a guide. It does not explain how to really work it. I finally was able to sort of figure out, and they said, oh, this member is not recognized, so you have to add a member. Okay, so the book explains how to add a member. You do all that, and then a window pops up that says, error, you are not allowed to manually add someone. You must have Qualys do it for you, so call this number to have Qualys do this for you. Okay, so I've wasted a whole morning doing all this stuff. I call Qualys, and they say, due to a high number of call volume at this time, we cannot take your call. Please try again later. So, meanwhile, this can set you back. People have other things to do, right? So this is setting you back. This kid then is being delayed. Qualys also, for one other child that I was working with, trying to get the prior authorization, it took over a month to get the prior authorization. The only reason, it kept on saying pending, pending, because you go and you look online. And the only reason I think that kid got the prior authorization quick after that is because these third-party companies, they send out weekly tips. This is how to do this, and this is how to do this. So I wrote back and I said to email, fortunately you can, it's not a no reply. And I said, it'd be really helpful, instead of sending these little tips, just get this get our kids, the prior authorization, tell us it's denied, or say they're authorized, but not, over a month later, so it was like 3 days after that, oh, he was approved. But this and Conduit also, God bless the people there, because I've been to Conduit and I can tell that they're also frustrated. So there's an issue that we are paying a lot of money, and I don't know what the solution is, because sometimes third parties help so that, we don't have only one hand in the pocketbook, right? Because then it goes into the pocket sometimes instead of, so I don't know what the solution is, but it's something that we really need to address, and we really need to figure out, because it's costing a lot of money, and there's a lot of inefficiency that costs us all. So that's just something to think about, start talking about for this, the new race coming up. Is that?
No, I really want to hear, the issues that you're actually dealing with, because the politicians need to hear that. But one of the things that strikes me is, I was in retail and customer service for a long, long time, and one of the things I learned from doing it, don't ever talk to the first person you get on the phone. Don't even waste time. Tell them what the story is, and say, I need to talk to your supervisor, I need to talk to their supervisor. Like, don't even waste time, because they're low wage, nobody workers who haven't been trained in anything. They could have gotten hired yesterday. They're not going to know how to answer your question anyway. The only information they're given is, get them out of here as soon as possible. When you say, I need to talk to your manager, I need to talk to your supervisor, they'll try and get you to keep talking to them. They don't know what they're talking about. So if more and more families can be educated that when you go and have a serious issue with your child, don't waste it on, Susie, 19-year-old, who's not even trained to run the front desk. Get to administration, and I think that to me goes with the government and everything. We have to get this voice, this issue, these daily issues for all of you, because I've heard it with Rosemary. I mean, the stuff that this woman has gone through her entire life, fighting the school system, fighting the government, fighting everything to push for legislation. And I think if we can stop wasting time with the people who just don't care or can't do anything. So like when you have a hospital issue, find out who is the lead administration and demand to talk to their president. Don't waste time with anybody else, because that's the only person who can change it. And the more voices, frustrated voices telling them exactly why that system doesn't work, is when they go and hire the person to clean up the website, or they go and hire the person to do a new study about, why is that so inefficient for people with disabilities to try and get on the program. I mean, I know that from retail. You don't get anything done when you have a complaint at Macy's till you talk to the lead administrator at the New York office, and then that thing's fixed the next second. So I think one of the things is not so much that you aren't advocates, because I think you're incredible advocates. You would not be here right now. Rosemary doesn't know anybody who isn't an incredible activist. But it has to be more, you gotta go to the top. And I think the problem in DC is the people at the top, unless you have someone like Susanna Martinez who's just deliberately ignoring how hard it is, most of the people at the top don't actually physically know what it's like to deal with this bureaucracy that they've created that's supposed to help you. And when you keep going to the low-level people, who don't even have the authority to fix what you're asking them to fix, they don't even have the right to make that decision, you're never going to get anywhere. And I'm not saying that those of you here don't do that, but make it a #1 policy from now on. When you get on the phone and you're stuck with somebody who's just, it's like, excuse me, I just explained who I was, I just explained what my issue is, I need to talk to your supervisor. No, I need to talk to your supervisor right now, thank you. You don't have to be angry or mean or anything. Just demand to get to the people who actually have the power. Like you said, as soon as that person got to the right person, it was fixed. Because they're the only ones with the authority to do it.
I just want to say, and this comes from a place of frustration and seeing a lot, but I think there are also channels out there, which we all know about, like the SNAP that's going on here, the Center on Law and Poverty is trying to, expose that and set things right. But I've seen like the insurance companies where they have told their prior authorization departments misinformation. And I would say, show me in the regs where that is written. And they would say, and I said, where did you get that from? My supervisor told me, let me speak to your supervisor. I never got to speak to the supervisor, but it was fixed the next day. And they ran facts and say, there's nowhere does it state in the regulations that we need to submit X document or piece of paper.
And that's what I'm saying. If you cut to the highest levels of whatever entity is frustrating you, they'll know exactly what you're talking about, and they have the authority to fix it in that exact moment. So I think if more and more people who are dealing, and you just described it exactly, when you know who to get to, and even if you don't get to them, word gets out that it gets to them, because upper management doesn't want to be bothered. So when they find out they are being bothered, they want it fixed as soon as possible.
Yes and no. I mean, when you call them out on it, but this was misinformation being told deliberately because it delays the process and everybody's holding on to their purse strings right now. Because we don't know what's going on.
And so this is another reason I'm talking to all of you, is like there's going to have to be a certain point of grassroots participation in, like, is there already a sort of community Albuquerque Facebook page or something where we can start posting? Maybe if everybody can post, okay, this is who's the best person to talk to at, whatever agency, or here's how I got through this bureaucracy or something. Like, I'm wondering, so maybe now that I've got all this contact list, maybe what I'll do is start sending out these statements, and you guys can give me some feedback, and let's see if we can get a site together. Something about that's like a resource central. So whenever somebody has a breakthrough or a frustration or whatever, it's right there on Facebook. You can go to that page, you can post the comments, you could, I just think as a community, this group of people could do such damage in these elections if we were really out there with the information as much as possible.
I agree with what you said if we were like 2 years ago, but I worry now about who's going to controlling on the Facebook side. Do you have some kind of, would you have someone who first looks at the comments before they?
Well, I mean, obviously I'm taking this on myself. I mean, I would just sort of moderate, and like if this is, we'll have, they always have those little boxes at the top of Facebook. It's like, this is the policy of this particular. You can't post anything incendiary. You can't start, you just make a sort of header that stays stationary, so that no matter how many posts are put down, that's always up there. And this is the rules. It has to be polite. It has to be, information-based. It has to be this, otherwise it will be removed, kind of thing. And so, it's just something where we just keep it civil, we keep it facts-based, we keep it organized, and we just try and get, because all of you have some gem of information that somebody else didn't know about. You solved some horrific problem that everyone else is still desperately trying to slog through. And if we had that one site and that one page where everybody's like, oh my gosh, you guys, you have to, this is this paperwork that I just found out about. It's just great, and it just expedites everything, or whatever it is. But I think if we can start pulling together the kind of devoted people that show up at events like this and just build that, the problem with disabilities is people think, if I don't hear about it, it'll go away. And they don't mean to, they just, politicians, they have a million things on their plates. And the thing about disabilities in New Mexico that I keep hearing is our disabilities population is growing exponentially. And it really is, the last statistic I heard, and I need to find out where I heard it, is we're gonna be at 50% of New Mexico's state population will have some form of disabilities in about 20 to 25 years. Now, I need to substantiate that, but...
Well, it makes sense because our population, the baby boomers are aging, and we can see that they will start having disabilities themselves.
It's partially that, but we're talking disabilities births. We're
Okay.
talking births.
Yes.
This was studies done about the birth rate, and if it continues at the levels it's continuing at. And there's all kinds of speculation as to why it is growing.
Sure.
I don't even want to step into those waters.
Is that just for New Mexico?
Just for New Mexico.
How
Although,
does that compare across the board to
It's
others?
a thing that's alarming in the entire country, which is we are not building the infrastructure that's going to be required. Medically, you can't even get, it's like Rosemary. When I try and get her up to City Hall to go just talk at the council meetings, it's a nightmare. There's some entry we finally found in the parking lot that gets her in through the back way, and even then there's those sloping ramps that are scary as heck unless you're holding on tight. She could, if I lost control of her, she'd go slamming into the podium. I mean, this is like, bless Ken Sanchez, and I know he's been fighting for this kind of stuff. Our city hall isn't even disabilities friendly. Something is horribly wrong, and the problem is the voice of the community isn't unified enough to their eyes, not to you. I know you folks are all doing all these things, but you're not this voice almost like a union or something that just comes pounding at the door with this giant fist and says, this is our issue, fix it, It's a lot of tiny voices with really valid points, but not the giant fist of people talking. So I'm putting that out there, me, not that I have a lot of time myself, but I would like to take that list that you folks all participated in, and let's just make a commitment if you have the time or whatever. Let's just start getting some kind of a Facebook page or whatever. I'll start the word out first with just a mass sort of email to everybody. Anybody that doesn't want to be included, let me know, because I don't want to, bombard people, but I'd like to get us to build a community here so that we can start talking about these issues and start knowing what to pressure these politicians about. Because I don't know. I don't know what you're dealing with. I know what Rosary's told me, but every single one of you has really valid points that, again, if our disabilities population keeps growing the way it is, are going to be the main issues in this state. And if we get our voices heard now, and we're building infrastructure, whenever a new building gets built, it's completely disabilities friendly, whenever new legislation is passed. My concern now, because I went to the New Mexico poverty law, is that what it's called? Center on Poverty and Law. And so they've got that big, not legislation, that lawsuit. It's an amazing lawsuit that is holding the state accountable to the fact that in our Constitution, it requires that every single child from no matter what background has to have the same level of education. And that level has to be at the highest level of whatever the state has. We haven't even remotely met that, and that's what this lawsuit's about. But my problem with that when I sat through it is not once in that conversation did I hear disabilities mentioned. If we aren't building into a groundbreaking, they're talking about this legislation, or this lawsuit, when settled, if it's settled in our favor, will be something the entire country will be looking at to guarantee proper education for our children. So we are setting a precedent right now that's historic, and I didn't hear anything that mentioned children with disabilities. I'm not saying it's not in there, but I need this community to find out what is going on with that, because if we aren't building into the settlement on that lawsuit some really serious community-based issues around fixing what's going on with disabilities children in our educational system, we're wasting a whole lot of time and energy. We need to be active as a community. We need to understand that stuff.
Do you recall the name of the person from Central Law Poverty who was spearheading this?
I wrote it all down, so what I can do is maybe, yeah.
My stepdaughter used to work for them a year ago.
Okay.
So she knows everybody there, and I can email her and say, you know.
I mean, the person that's my friend that told me about it is Cynthia Colson. She was the paralegal that kind of put all the paperwork together. The paperwork alone on this lawsuit, just so you know how important it was, the cost of just the lawsuit to file all the paperwork was $40,000. Just to make the copies of the papers to give to the courts. That's how insane this thing is. It is a comprehensive educational stance saying we have to enforce the already existing constitutional laws of this state so that no child gets left behind on this. And if we aren't integrating, if you folks with all the issues that you've got and the stories you've got aren't having the disability's voice built into the wording of that, that's like a sword through my heart. So whatever I can do to expedite that, whatever we can do to build some kind of community, if Facebook works for you guys, whatever, we'll work it out as we can. But just keep an eye out. My name's Lara Dale, L-A-R-A. And so I will get that list consolidated, and I will get it as a mass sort of emailing initially.
Where did the list go? 'Cause it didn't come to
I think
all
it's
of us.
back at the little sign-up table there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's like there's a couple of lists there, and you'll see names on them, so if people can sign up. And so I will take on this as far as getting that going. But I don't come from disabilities. I come from my relationship with Nani. So you folks are the ones who know these painful, difficult issues that never get addressed. And if we can build that community and build that coalition and have that built in, particularly into the writing of this lawsuit, I really want to make sure your voices are heard in that one, because that one hurt a lot. There's kids with disabilities in our school system, and if their needs aren't being written into the story of this lawsuit, that is off the charts wrong. So I'm going to need your help is basically what I'm saying. Let me find out, do we have our next speakers?
Oh, I'm here. I'm not the next speaker.
We may have to put you on.
Okay. Susan Tomika, I'm a lawyer. I think I'm just
Okay.
going to answer questions. I'm going to get a drink though.
Anyway, I really appreciate the willingness to get involved in this, and also I'm not we have to do it my way or the highway. I want this to be a community-based decision as much as possible. So I'm going to need some feedback, but I want us to get like an empowered Facebook page where families with disabilities members can post what's going on, can post victories, can post problems. Yeah.
I see this also as a need a place to post phone numbers. We moved here, you're going to want us who call, where to call, anything about resources.
Yeah, I think Facebook's a little cautious about phone numbers.
Well, I don't mean phone numbers, but names.
Resources, maybe.
Right, resources, right. That's a great idea. Like maybe we can have just a side column you can click on that's got some basic, like these folks and all that kind of stuff. And also folks can also send me information, data, oh, I just found out about this new agency, whatever. It's got to be an ongoing thing that we're all sort of feeding into and checking into. The other thing I would caution you about Facebook is that you will get registered there to be notified of stuff, and they won't. Especially if you're on a lot of sites.
Yeah, they'll send you the stuff that you don't care, right? And that's, I have a billion.
So you'd have to make a priority as a community to check your Facebook page every day. Post on it, respond as much as possible. But my thing is just these elections are so critical. And the disabilities community has got to have a voice in this, like a serious, profound voice where the real issues are being dealt with.
So I have a question.
I understood that Michelle Christian was coming today. Why didn't she come?
She was stuck in DC. I mean, you can only imagine what they're dealing with up there. She gave us a really great video. Like
I saw it a couple of times,
Yeah,
but that's just like nothing compared. I mean, it's almost, you know, like if it's not important enough to come, then that just speaks to me. I mean, I want to believe that she's really interested, but I don't know.
No, I hear you. I think most people in the disability community could tell you that she has done a tremendous amount for them. But
Well, I've been in the disabilities community for a long time,
Yeah.
23 years. And so I'm not really aware of anything, I'm not aware of everything in the world, but I will look into it.
Yeah.
I was just disappointed because I feel like it makes a huge statement, you know, to say you're gonna come and not be there.
But again, this speaks to this commitment we have to make as a community, because we're the only voices. And if we start dropping out and we can't be bothered and we can't follow this and we can't that, this is on us. It's not, there's no great deity that comes down and blesses the disabilities community.
I
It's
know,
people
but
like
I
us
have to
bring.
prioritize where I spend
Yeah.
my time and attention and all that kind of thing too. So if I'm talking to someone that doesn't really care about it, then I want to know up front. And,
Yeah.
you know, I'm just saying that.
Well, and if there's anyone in the community sort of more on the pulse of the politicians and kind of their stances, Rosemary's been pretty good about it too, but it might be that one thing we can do is kind of start posting things like, here's, you know, this was a disabilities vote that happened, here's how these people voted and how these people voted, you decide, you know, kind of thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a political Facebook page, but I think we should also be thinking, you know, because one of the things Rosemary and Nani have always kept tremendous track of is legislation. Nani would just go down the halls with her cell phone and just, she would know, oh, he voted against that, she voted for it, he, you know, I mean, she would just know every single bill and every single person who voted for and against. And that level of discipline and focus is, I don't know if all of us are capable of, but it'd be nice on that site to just have just a reference. So the next time you're talking to a politician who seems totally genuine, you can just wave away what they said and go look on the thing and you'll see, oh no, he completely voted against that. What a, you know.
That would be very valuable to have that.
Yeah.
Before the day's out, could you just give a little brief who For Friends and Out of the Box is? Because I got your flyer from the ARC website. I mean, their email list that they sent out, that Carmen Garcia sends out. But I don't know who For Friends is. I don't
You know, I can't speak
to.
to that. Rosemary can. It's sort of a loose affiliation of people that have these concerns and just kind of coalesced to put this event on.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how long it's been in existence.
Okay.
And that's the other problem. It's just, you know, the community needs to rally and, you know, when one person in a wheelchair is trying to pull all this together, it becomes very, very difficult. So we all need to kind of step up to the plate a little bit more in terms of how we can contribute. And I think the biggest thing is information data. So I will try and get that Facebook page going and get the information out to you folks. And let's just all be, you know, what is it, that stone soup thing? You know, you start out with a bowl and a rock, and then you end up with this amazing feast, but we all need to just throw something into it. But, yeah.
Well, this is just one last thing. I just want to say for Michelle Lujan, she did come out on a Saturday morning to support the deaf community when we asked her. She was very busy, but she was back for a few days from Washington, and she got up, she came, she was there early, and she spent the whole morning with us.
Nice.
And it was a small community. It wasn't like there were 100 people. There were 50, 25. And she made that commitment and she talked about disabilities. So I think that, I mean, I was...
Well, and if you look at her legislative record, you know, and Nani and Rosemary are really great to talk to you about that because they keep meticulous tabs on legislation. But if that's the thing, it's like the paper trail, like follow the money. It's like follow the votes.
Yeah.
Whenever you're confused about it, just go in and go onto their site and look up their voting record, and whatever issue is the most critical one for you, just find out how they voted. That's all you need to know most of the time with these people.
And it would be good, for example, on that Facebook page to show the link on how to do that, because that's obvious to people who go up to Santa Fe. But for the rest of us, like, what, go on there, where, who, how.
Right, and like you brought up before, you know, there's so many things. I deal with Conduit, and they're an exercise in patience.
So, and the people there also are not always happy people. It's not like they're doing it purposefully. It's that the structure is off.
there's something going on. Anyway, I retired at the end of last year partially because I didn't feel like I was doing enough for my son. And I felt like, you know, I have this window and I need to make this a priority. And conduit was one big reason that I did that, because they can become a full-time job if you're going to try to, they use paperwork, they do all these things. So a person's time and energy and just figuring out things like how to follow the codes, you know, are really important to us, but we've got to figure out which one we're going to do first and how.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so many issues for you folks, and that's the hard part, is they just keep throwing curveballs at you from every side, and just when you turn around and catch that one's just bashed in the head. I am not knocking that. I've learned that from Rosemary. You just have to sit in your chair and just be heard, you know, and you start with the issue that's the most important one until they do something else and do something else. But I'd like to get our next speaker.
I just wanted to say one thing, you know, the conduit gets $7,000 for each person that is on the waiver every year. That's a lot of money for what they do. That's awful.
And I mean, we kind of need to rally, it's true, get together and rally the legislatures and say, you know, because it's not some nice benefactor's money who's paying conduit.
$7,000 a year.
It comes from our working tax dollars.
And you know, I feel like I'm a pretty strong proponent for my son, and when I feel like I'm jumping through 5 flaming hoops every time to get something done, or they lose things, you know, 5 times, all that kind of thing, which isn't uncommon. And you go over there, you sit there in the office, they put you in a room, you call and see if you can get it handled on the phone. You can actually get it handled faster that day than sitting in the room waiting for the person to come back. So you just think, what if the next person's parent isn't able to do that? Right? What if they don't have the kind of shift work that they can get in there early in the afternoon, go sit there and wait for somebody, or what if their parent is working 4 jobs or something like that, you know? What do they do? Well, obviously they don't get the benefits that they should be getting. They don't get the services they should be getting, because I don't know that it's intentionally being made that hard for them, but because the services are so inaccessible. You know, some of the things that a person should get or should be able to have access to are almost impossible to get, simply because of the red tape.
Well, and part of this, all the budget slashing that goes on, we've got to
But
get.
if it's in the budget,
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
my son has a budget
Yeah.
through the DD waiver, but to access that, I mean, sometimes I've wondered, before I retired, I thought, you know, we have this budget. I'm making extraordinary efforts to access these things. I'm taking off work, I'm using my sick leave, I'm using my annual leave to get into appointments for therapy and stuff, but I can't even access those things because of red tape, just red tape.
So another suggestion, this is what I learned from Rosemary a long, long time ago. If we can just like pick a day when everybody can go, Saturday or whatever, to the Roundhouse when there's like some major legislation going on. If 30 of you show up with all your disabilities family members, and even if you don't, they will never forget that. There's not that many people that do that. The schools will do it, which is why they generally get decent funding, because they'll show up in bus loads and just hog the entire front section, you know. And I'm not saying they shouldn't, I'm just saying this community, as exhausted as you are, you're gonna have to rally in this election. We're gonna have to pick a couple of days, a couple of weekends or something, where we just all go up there en masse, sit, you know, all together in some row somewhere and just demand to be heard. It makes a difference. The problem, the game that's played is to get you to think that politics doesn't work. It does work. You just have to work really hard to get noticed.
I have a question. So
Yeah.
when they're voting against the legislation that is being put forward, are they voting against it because of a certain part of the bill, or just all of it in general? Do we know why they're saying no? So we can.
That is a tough one, and that's why you need to sit down. You need to, you know, Rosemary knows, Nani knows every single politician practically on both sides of the aisle. That's the other amazing thing. She's not just sticking with the people on our side. She's holding people accountable on the other side. When I walk with her through the Roundhouse, it's insane, because every single politician from every side of the aisle, oh, Nani, hey, how's it going? They'll want photo ops with her, and she'll look up like, oh, you didn't pass that legislation. No, that's just like, I mean, it's amazing. But I'm just saying, like, this is one person who diligently has held them accountable. Everybody knows about it.
Right.
If it was 10 of you, 15 of you, 20 of you, this would be a common dialogue. They would never, ever leave disabilities out of any of their legislation.
Is there any way that you could post a site where they can ask them questions, like why did you not vote for the bill?
I can almost guarantee you what they would say is, call my assistant,
Okay.
tell me what's going on. That, which is fine, but it's just like what you talked about. When it's just one person facing down a bureaucracy, fly speck on a wall. When 30 people show up with their beloved family members, all dealing with that issue, and stand up and say, stop it, fix this. Bing! It's not miracles, but it's a heck of a lot faster than what you go through normally.
There's the land workshop, the 2-day workshop that's the Center for Development and Disabilities at UNM does, where it's kind of like condensed into 2 days about how to go to Santa Fe to the legislature.
So that's what can be posted on the Facebook page. Hey guys, everybody, we got all, whoever can make it, please, please, please. And if you can't, tell everybody.
Yeah.
So things like that where we can, everybody can post in the events that are coming
That's
up.
helpful for us. There's like the Partners in Policy making thing that they have, I think it's every Friday for. So that's helpful for us to learn how to advocate.
Right. Well, I just want to know what part they're disagreeing with. So it could be the way the bill was written. It could be a portion of something that
Could
they
be a
would agree
snippet,
with,
right?
and then they can't approve the whole thing because of that one thing. So
And that would be almost impossible for me to tell you that because it
Yeah,
probably
so-
varies for each bill and for each person voting and
So
everything.
unless we know that information, we're not going to know what unless you go directly and talk to them, what did you not like about the bill? And that way you can't correct the bill.
And I would say that it would probably be good for everybody to get to know that woman who was our first speaker.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like she's a real powerhouse in terms of staying on top of the actual legal aspects of it. So it might be good, and I'm going to send her, she's going to be part of this loop, so we'll keep her in on it. But let's just see, it really is about holding people accountable, but more than that, it's about them knowing how many of you are going to hold them accountable.
Right.
And it's not like one voice, Gandhi's proof that one voice matters. But it's because a whole bunch of other people started walking with him that he achieved what he achieved. It's not because one guy walked through India, So we got to start mobilizing. And the worst thing about elections is what's going to happen with them. The best thing is it brings us together and we start doing stuff that we're otherwise too busy or too confused or too whatever to deal with, because we have no choice. And this is a really important election. So let's just, I will do everything on my part. I will, Rosemary and Nani can answer a lot of questions too, because they've been doing this for so long. Rosemary's been taking Nani to the Roundhouse, I don't know, since she was like 10 or 12 or something. I mean, Nani was practically living there for a lot of her young childhood and adulthood. So it's that thing of just making your government a part of your family, even if it's the most dysfunctional part. And, having that family conversation with the patriarch about, you need to stop doing this. But this kind of group, because all of you are so clearly motivated and you're so clearly passionate about this, and it really doesn't take that many people. It's that 100th monkey thing of you just get a core percentage of people who are on with the message, it just kind of spreads. But you have to get that core percent and they have to be really committed. But when they are, it changes. It really does change everything. So I will do my part to really mobilize in terms of this contact list we have, getting a Facebook page, and then just empowering everybody in a polite, respectful, informative way to just start educating each other as if you're family about what we need to do to fix these things and what are the issues and who do we need to call and those kinds of things. And everybody can just post all the suggestions and stuff. I would like to get on to our next speaker because I have my notes here. I'm sorry. Why don't you just come up and introduce yourself? I'm so sorry.
Hi. I'm Susan Tomika, and I'm a lawyer that works in disabilities law. I'm sorry, in disability sort of issues, and I was just asked to stop by and answer questions that people might have. So I think I have about 20 minutes or so. If anybody has any questions concerning disability type issues, yes.
So Joan Curtis,
Yes.
she said to ask you about the ABLE Act? And
Yes.
who's rallying for it? Is there anything going on? Is there other organizations that are, other lawyers that are trying to get implemented in New Mexico? She kind of wasn't too sure. She said she thought, you know, definitely in other states, but she said you would be the person who probably would know.
Yes, my understanding from the people at the ARC is that the thought was, you know, certainly people that reside in New Mexico can have ABLE accounts. The question is whether our state is going to develop sort of a program where we have our own accounts here rather than shopping around in other states. And at least my understanding, secondhand from the people at the ARC, is that it was thought that it's just not cost effective. They kind of looked at the number of people that they thought would have ABLE accounts and the cost that it would cost to, you know, have a mechanism here in New Mexico, and that the chances that we would do that would be fairly slim given the budget, you know, problems and so forth. At least with my clients, it seems like, you know, shopping around, and most people seem to be doing the stable account in Ohio, you know, isn't working that poorly. So at least it seems like people who want ABLE accounts are being able to establish them without too much difficulty. And then they have debit cards and so forth that you can use. So it makes it, you know, consumer friendly. You know, I do a lot of special needs trusts. I work with personal injury lawyers and setting up, you know, planning options for people with disabilities. And the ABLE Act has really made a remarkable difference because, as you might know, special needs trusts are really restrictive trusts. Generally, they can't be used for food or shelter, and the person, the beneficiary, can't receive money directly. But if you were disabled before the age of 26, you can now have an ABLE account, and both our Medicaid people as well as Social Security nationally, although nationally they haven't come out with POMs yet, but we're promised by the end of the year we'll have them. You know, you can fund ABLE accounts from special needs trusts. So a lot of the restrictions that made special needs trusts really unmanageable, either when you get a settlement and you're doing it for yourself, or your parents are setting up a special needs trust for you, have really been alleviated by the ability to put this year $14,000 a year, beginning next year $15,000 a year, into an ABLE account. And the beneficiary can access that directly, can use it for food or shelter, and just have a lot more control, you know, over their, you know, their own needs and destiny. So I've found in my practice it's really been revolutionary. So, you know, to the extent that we can get legislation that increases the age, you know, that you're eligible for doing it, or makes it easier for people to access it, you know, the better, because it really has. You know, I think in the special needs community, frankly, you know, people are somewhat self-interested. There were a lot of lawyers that are really concerned, oh, this is going to, you know, really impede into our practice in doing special needs trusts. So there was, you know, some unfortunate, I think, concern about what was going to happen when ABLE was enacted. But it's turned out to be really, really a blessing. You know, it could be broader than it is now, but to the extent that it's even applicable now, it's made a really big difference. So.
What does that mean? I really don't know enough about the ABLE stuff. I mean, I know it is the law, there's legislation for it. But what do you mean it would cost too much? I mean, I don't understand. I just thought it would be a law where if you go to any bank and you start a bank account for X person, what is the costly part that's too costly for you?
What it is, it's 529A of the old 529 Act that, it's a tax statute actually. Under 529, you could open college education, you know, accounts for your children.
Yes.
And so this allows people with disabilities to also do that under the umbrella of the same act. But you can't go to any bank. Essentially, you have to have a financial plan that provides ABLE accounts. So it's not like you can go to Wells Fargo and open an ABLE account. You know, the states essentially establish ABLE programs. Of course, they're managed by a financial institution. For example, I think the one in Ohio that a lot of people are using, it's Fidelity that is actually managing the money. But it's really the state running the program. So you have to open the account with a certified ABLE provider. And right now, there's a handful of states that not only allow people within their state, but anybody from across the United States to open ABLE accounts within their state. Frankly, with the ones I've worked with, I'm not sure it would make that much difference if it were a New Mexico entity as opposed to, you know, one in Ohio or Massachusetts or the other places that allow nationwide ABLE accounts.
Is there a specific site that
Yes, there is a site, and I really should have brought, if you Google it, you know, you'll find it, but there's a national site that is really helpful because it lists all the ABLE programs. It identifies which one will accept beneficiaries outside of the estate, outside of their state, but in addition, it will compare the different programs because there's differences in how they invest, how you can access the monies, you know, how many times you can access it, what the fees are, all of that. So it's kind of a comparison. And my understanding right now is, you know, it increases every day. I mean, not every day, but, you know, really frequently. But there's at least, you know, 6 or 8 states that we can open accounts in. As I said, most of my clients that have carefully compared, you know, so far seem to be going with the one in Ohio. But I heard that Indiana came out with one that seems attractive as well. So.
And you don't know the name of that site?
You know, it's sort of like able.org. I mean, it's really pretty counterintuitive. But you know, but if you Google it, is it able.org? Yeah. And we like things that are easy to remember. All these states are coming out with cute names, so it's stable, enable, but so hopefully people have questions. Otherwise, you know, the idea was I would come and if anybody had. One thing that you might be interested in is I think we are right on the point of having major revisions to our guardianship statute. The uniform commissioners on laws for the country finally came out with well, in fact, they haven't really done it yet, but they're right on the verge, you know, within months, of coming out with a proposed uniform law for guardianships and conservatorships. And you know, if you follow the idea of uniform laws is, you know, because we're a federal system with all these different states, each state has different laws, and a lot of times they don't match very well. So if you move from state to state, you might have to redo your guardianship, and you know, the rules that apply might be really different. So the uniform commissioners are a group of lawyers that were tasked with trying to make the laws in the different states uniform. So they've come out with a whole series of uniform acts. And our state has been sort of the uniform law junkie. You know, we're always the first state to adopt a new uniform law, and we take real pride in that. So, and we have lawyers that are really dedicated to doing that. So there's a really good chance that when the uniform law finally is proposed, that especially with all the turmoil with guardianships in New Mexico, we will end up with something very similar to the uniform law. One thing that I've been really, you know, personally, I have a disabled child, and one thing that I've been really, that's been really important to me is the thought that guardianships are far too expensive. You know, there's one system that applies to anybody that needs a guardianship, and it's really geared towards senior citizens. You know, when you come in and try to take over your parents' affairs, of course there's got to be lots of due process because you might be unhappy that they're going to be married to somebody you don't like. You know, you think sister or brother, you know, is getting too much benefit from them. So the court wants to be real careful before you can come in and be appointed guardian and conservator for your parent. But when you apply the same series of laws to a child that has just become 18, and there's not any change in the status quo, it's going to continue to be, you know, exactly the same it was before. There's no doubt that the child really needs the help of a guardian, and there's no question that the parents, you know, are appropriate. To have to go through that expensive process where you have 2 lawyers involved, you know, a court-appointed visitor, and you're paying $5,000, $6,000 for the whole process, this doesn't make sense. It always made sense to me that there should be a different system for 18-year-olds that became adults. you know, of course, if there's a problem, there should be some way of taking it a step further and making it more complicated. But, you know, in the course of my practicing law, you know, I'm now practiced law for around 35 years, you know, I've done hundreds of these cases, and mainly for, you know, children that have become 18. And out of all the hundreds of cases I've done, there was just one where there was a potential problem with the parents being guardians. So all these people paid, you know, a large amount of money to go through this process, and the result was essentially, you know, what should have happened to begin with. So under the new statute, you know, if we adopt it as proposed by the Uniform Commissioners, one thing that's going to change is that the court-appointed attorney for the disabled individual is going to become optional. You know, that right now, you have your attorney that petitions, there's a guardian ad litem, which is an attorney for the disabled individual, and then a court-appointed visitor or social worker that visits everybody and reports to the court. Under the new statute, the guardian ad litem, the court-appointed lawyer for the disabled person, will become optional. So the visitor, the social worker, can recommend that in a particular case, the lawyer be appointed, or the judge can sua sponte decide that. But it's no longer absolutely required. So if you have a really straightforward case, you know, you can eliminate one of the lawyers, which will eliminate, you know, a substantial amount of the funds. And in addition, you know, our task force that has been working on guardianships, you know, has been making attempts to come out with a set of forms that will help a parent to petition on their own. So conceivably, you could get rid of both lawyers, and that would save really a lot of money. So, you know, it can become something where, you know, there needs to be enough in place so that if there's a situation where the parents really are not appropriate for one reason or other, you know, somebody can catch it and ask the court to provide more due process protections. But if it's your really standard, you know, simple, routine type case, you don't have to pay a lot of money to do it. Because frankly, being a parent of a disabled child, you know you don't have the savings that maybe somebody else had that didn't have all those expenses. And it's just really unfortunate that at the end, you know, at the 18-year-old turning point, that suddenly you have this big expense that really for most people is not really necessary.
How did parents, I mean, or now, this may pass, how do they cope with that? What happens? What if they don't have money? What if they don't have the $6,000? Say they, you know, are struggling paycheck to paycheck. What happens when that child of theirs who has a disability, who needs a guardian, turns 18? How does the law take care of it? I mean,
no, not very well. There's an Office of Guardianship that if you meet the financial requirements, they can pay for most of the costs. But, you know, there's been a long waiting list, so if you need to have somebody appointed right, you know, within the last time I checked, it was about 10 months or so, and there's been some disarray in the office, so there's been periods of time where it's harder to get services. So that's an option. One really big need is that there are very few, for some reason, there are very few lawyers in the guardianship community that speak Spanish fluently. So people that are primarily Spanish speakers have a really hard time. I just did a guardianship for a family that was primarily Spanish speaking, and you know, when the lady called me, and she's just this wonderful, wonderful mother, and she, you know, she paid in cash and everything, so it wasn't like she was somebody that wasn't going to pay her fees, but she said she called numerous people and she was not able to get anybody who would help her, and so finally, you know, somebody in her church who I had known from working with the Archdiocese called and said, you know, this lady really needs somebody. And her daughter had a disability where it was really important to have somebody in place at 18 because she, you know, she was capable enough that she could have moved on at that point and, you know, got into a lot of trouble when really she didn't have the capacity to make her own decisions. So in that case, it was really important to have somebody in place before she was 18. But nobody wanted to do it because frankly, you know, this area, you know, lawyers are called on to do a lot of pro bono work. And, you know, I don't know if you've been following with the Ayudando cases. It was sort of a disaster, and the court called on all these guardianship lawyers to do all this free work, and most of us spent like an entire month without being able to bill. I mean, it was really just a disaster. But they're already kind of stressed out, so it's hard to find free lawyers in this area because it's such an area of need that it's hard. People I think try to do without it. And we years ago I was on a group that proposed the Uniform Healthcare Decision-Making Act that was passed by the legislature. And part of it was to prevent having to do guardianships in really simple cases. And what the Uniform Act said is that if you don't have a guardian, you don't have a power of attorney, there was a series of people who could be your proxy decision makers. And it was essentially your next of kin. But right after that, the HIPAA law was passed that really penalized healthcare professionals for sharing information. I think there was a real overreaction, and then all of a sudden, nobody would, all the doctors wouldn't cooperate. I remember the week my son became 18, he became 18 on a Tuesday. On a Thursday, he had a regular doctor's appointment at Loveless, and we couldn't remember whether it was at 2 or 3. So I called and I said, oh, I'm so-and-so's mother, I just want to figure out whether our appointment is at 2 or 3. And they looked at the chart and they said, oh, he's 18, we can't tell you. So I said, well, he can't call himself, and so, I need to know whether it's at, no, we can't tell you. So I said, well, can I say, is it at 2? And you can say yes or no. And I'll know what it is, no, we can't give you any information at all. And so then it became really apparent that, you worry that if there's an emergency, or my son is one that's, inclined to get into, trouble and things like that, that I would really be hampered, without having that authority. So it became, it's a problem. It's a problem. It's an expensive problem. And so some relief, I think, is going to be a really wonderful thing. So that's right on the horizon. In fact, in the guardianship lawyer community, we've been having a lot of seminars and so forth explaining the Uniform Act. And I think, especially since, there's been a lot of things in the news about guardianships, there's going to be some change. And the likelihood, given the fact that we are uniform law junkies, is we will end up with this new thing. Yes?
From the aspects of anything you were talking about, it would be helpful to have public voice or public pressure around it? Or is it just all going to be solved in the courts?
Well, because of all this, most of the controversy about guardianships have involved, senior citizens and so forth. But, when there are hearings, the Supreme Court just wound up a whole series of, they formed a commission on guardianships, and they had Saturday meetings and stuff, which mostly involved the senior citizen type situation. But, when there are opportunities to speak up, and voice concerns, it would be good, people participated in that. Especially the voice that I think is really not heard very much is the parents of adult disabled children. Because it is that area of guardianships that are almost kind of an afterthought. Because most people that do the guardianships heavy duty are really looking at the family fighting over the money and all of that kind of stuff. So people don't think of the, the really routine guardianships. So
where would be the place they would get the voices heard?
Well, I think, and I don't know what exactly scheduled it, because it's actually been proposed before the legislature, but there's always hearings and that they hold on different acts. It's so hard because, I've tried to participate in those hearings before. They never know when it's going to happen. So you have to, keep your calendar free for a month or something. Then they'll call you and you have to rush up to Santa Fe. So, it really is kind of, frankly, though, I think on that issue, it's not going to be that controversial. Everybody's ready for a change, and I think most people realize that some change has to occur. And the Uniform Act is the likely thing. So I think the battles in large part have been fought on that. A large part on a national level, there was a strong voice of people that said, this is just too expensive. We can't really afford it. Because it has all the due process protections, but not the public defender services that you have for criminal defendants. So, it's, but yeah, so I think even without a lot of advocacy, the law is going to change.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Business cards?
Oh, yeah, I do have some business cards. Yeah, I'll pass
I've
on.
been looking at your attorney.
Oh, okay, well,
We moved here about 5 years ago.
oh.
We'll read that.
Yeah, I do a lot of, I belong to the Special Needs Alliance, which is a national organization, and, our idea is to, and, the neat thing about the Special Needs Alliance was I was at a conference, and there's right now about 150 people nationwide. Most of us, at least the majority, have children that are disabled, and so that's how we ended up doing that kind of thing. One thing to keep in mind, I just mentioned briefly about special needs trusts, is that, there are ways of being able to, leave children money, or if they inherit funds or get a personal injury settlement, to have it in a special kind of trust that still allows them to get needs-based benefits. And, as I mentioned before, one of the problems with those trusts is that they generally tend to be more restrictive. You can't use them for food or shelter, and then the person can't get money directly. But with ABLE and the ability to fund ABLE accounts with those trusts, it's really opened up, the ability to use those trusts but still have the flexibility of, allowing them to have some spending money on their own and pay for their rent and, groceries and things like that. So, but I can't, just kind of having caught the last of what you were saying, I can't emphasize over much the importance to really make an effort to be involved politically, because unfortunately, I think the things that can happen if we have these massive tax cuts for people that have huge amounts of money and stuff is just going to be devastating on all the public benefits, even more so that's what's in the the present budget. If we start running out of money, those types of programs are going to be cut. And, in addition to do disability planning, I do a lot of estate planning. So I occasionally work with people that have a lot of money. And I think that some of the misconceptions are that things like the estate tax and gift tax are unfair, and that they really sort of impinge on hardworking people and stuff. One, you don't have an estate tax unless you have over $5.5 million. So it's for wealthy people. But people that have a lot of money, they really have not paid taxes on that money, because most of it is capital gain. It's not like they work, they work 40 hours a week and then they pay money on that income tax, they put it in the bank and it adds up, and that's what we're talking about, being subject to the estate tax. It's money that they've had in investments that have grown over the years. And because there's a step up in basis when you die, for capital gains tax purposes, those monies are never taxed unless they're an estate tax. Like Bill Gates, is a wonderful person, does a wonderful thing, but most of his wealth from Microsoft, he's never paid tax on. It's just the appreciation of his initial investment. So, I think we have to be really careful and vigilant, because, unless we are, things like the DD waiver, I know people can hardly believe it, could go away. When I was a child, we didn't have Medicare or Medicaid, before the war on poverty, and they put all of those things on. So we really could go back to that. And if we don't speak up and say, speak for the people that, the people that we represent, that don't have a voice, all of the things can be taken away. So it's really, really an important time. Not to do a political thing, but, I've worked with Michelle, and, she really has gone overboard to be a voice for people that don't have a voice. I mean, when you compare with people that really make fun of disabled people and stuff, it's just no comparison. So, but I worry about what's going to happen in the future, all the people that we really care about. So anyway, so if any other questions or?
We would love to get your cards, and
Oh yeah.
Do you have like a website or anything else? Or?
I don't, but if you Google Susan Tomita,
T-O-M-I-T-A.
it's T-O-M-I-T-A. So, anyway, so I'll leave some cards though. Yes, and if anybody has, if you have questions that you think of, feel free to call me, and I won't charge you. I can just talk to you over the phone. So.